Hello everyone. Welcome to those who haven't been here before. Welcome back to those who have watched before. Thanks for coming again. My name is Leah Langley, and this is my video for the books I read in February 2025. Again, we're starting the months off well. I'm recording this on the last day of February, as I did the same thing with January, last day of January. This month in February, I read 4 books. That brings my total to the year up to 11. And let's just jump right in with the books I read in February. So the first book I read was Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear by Mosab Abutowa. It's a book of poetry. You might recognize his name because I read his book, Forest of Noise, which is his second work of poems in January. And I talked about that in my January video, so I can link that below if you'd like to see it. And this was his first set of poetry, and I was like, oh, okay, I want to, after I read Forest of Noise, which was excellent. That was my only 5-star rating last month, I believe. I was like, okay, I want to read his first book of poetry. This book, Things You May Find in My Ear. I gave it a 4 out of 5. It's a beautiful book of poetry. As I said in my last video in January, I'm not a huge poetry reader, but I obviously like Forest of Noise a lot, and I wanted to read this one. Mosab Abutowa is a Palestinian poet, and this is a quote from a review I saw on Goodreads, which I really liked, and I was like, there's no need to try to say this myself. Let me just take this quote. These poems chronicle the destruction of his country, the mass murdering of innocents, and hones on the omnipresent fears of bombings and soldier fire amidst a landscape that still arrives in striking beauty in contrast to smoldering wreckage around it. This is a couple quotes from the book that I wanted to pull. In Gaza, some of us cannot completely die. Every time a bomb falls, every time shrapnel hits our graves, every time the rubble piles up on our heads, we are awakened from our temporary death. Another quote here. We didn't hear the F-16s until they finished their strikes. They descended from the inferno. Dante hadn't mentioned them. That was one that just oof. This book, while he's spotlighting the long history of the horrors in Gaza and elsewhere, Abuto really points to the resiliency of the Palestinian people throughout this book and throughout this destruction, which I like. This some other quick quote from the book. In Gaza, you could find a man planting a rose in the hollow space of an unexploded tank shell, using it as a vase. The final poem in the book, this is a quote here. Don't ever be surprised to see a rose shoulder up among the ruins of the house. This is how we survived. And as he says as well, one function of poetry is to heal the wounds, which is undoubtedly the case. So I like this book. As I mentioned, it's very clearly chronicling what's happening in Gaza, but also pointing to the resilience of the Palestinian people, and obviously him being Palestinian himself, you have that connection there. It's not like someone else talking about the people. It's like he's talking about his own people, his own experiences. It was just a beautiful book of poetry. And again, poetry, this is a short book. This one, if you wanted to, you could just read it in a short period of time, but it's one you kind of want to sit with a little bit and read a couple pages, read a couple poems, come back. That's certainly what I did with this book, and I think it was excellent. This book, and also, as I mentioned, Forest of Noise from him are just excellent poems. So definitely give these a read. But that was book number 1 for February, Things You May Find in My Ear. Next up, book number 2 for February 2025 was a classic, Shakespeare. It is King Lear. Admittedly, I haven't read that much Shakespeare, and when I read this, I was like, okay, I need to go down some of the Shakespeare that I haven't read. I believe, I could be wrong. I might be wrong. I might be wrong, but I'm going to say this anyway. I believe the only Shakespeare that I've fully read is Much Ado About Nothing, and I remember that because it would have been my junior year of high school. We had to do it, and my teacher, Miss Sharon Somerville, the class, you read a Shakespeare book, and then you go up to Stratford, Ontario in Canada and watch a play at one of these theaters. That's what we did. So we read the book, and I still have that book actually in one of my bookshelves. And I was like, oh, the reason I picked up King Lear actually was because there was a reference. I forget, it was some show I was watching. I forget, I don't even remember the show, but someone said something, oh, he's like our King Lear. And I didn't fully get the reference, and I didn't like that. So I was like, let me pick up this book, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to start reading it today, essentially. So I picked it up and started reading it. So it's a solid Shakespeare read. It's probably one that many people have read before. As I said, I haven't read that much Shakespeare, and reading this made me want to be I need to knock off some of these Shakespeare books. I even thought I read Romeo and Juliet, but I was like, I don't think I've ever read Romeo and Juliet. Obviously, I know the story, and I've covered it a lot, or I've probably read bits and pieces in Romeo and Juliet, but I haven't sat through the whole reading of it. So this book kind of made me be like, let me get into my Shakespeare vibe. King Lear is about a king descending into madness. Kind of a quote here. Desperate for praise, he banishes those who would guide him with any honesty and surrounds himself with sycophants, an action that leads to his ultimate downfall. And I put here, like, sound familiar? Shakespeare's relation here of power, madness, suffering, and family truly stands the test of time. This book was written so long ago, but a lot of these themes in this book, you can probably, like, we can definitely see similarities today and all different types of things. And another thing I like about this book, there was many interesting and, like, multifaceted characters here. This book play, I mean, I know it was originally kind of like a play, but obviously you print it. And it was particularly interesting to see that juxtaposition between King Lear and his daughters, especially Cordelia, with Gloucester and his son Edgar, and kind of how, like, the difference of those who read the book will kind of know what I'm saying here, but kind of those differences of, like, Edgar still being loyal to his father, and Cordelia not, that them basically going to kind of banishment, but, like, Cordelia and not working out essentially, and kind of just, like, the difference between those family dynamics. I think just in general it was, like, a good solid book. I probably put this already somewhere, but I forgot to say I gave this a 4 out of 5. Like I said, and it kind of made me be like, I need to, like, get down some more of the Shakespeare rabbit hole. I'm not, like, a huge, like, I was saying to my sister, like, I'm not, like, a huge, like, oh, I'm gonna get to read all the old English. She did English in school, so she, like, you know, this is her thing. But I still, there's some books I'm like, I need to read Romeo and Juliet. I need to read some of these books, so I'm gonna get down those as we continue to go on here. All right, book number 3 for February 2025 is a memoir I heard a lot of great things about. It's called The Friday Afternoon Club, a family memoir by Griffin Dunn. Before I even go farther down this, like I said, I didn't know who Griffin Dunn was. I just had, every time I'd heard about this memoir, like, randomly, I'd heard great things. I think I had probably initially heard about it. The View, which is a show on ABC, they do this, a daytime talk show. They do this, like, book recommendation segment at the end of, like, their season. And Whoopi Goldberg, who actually is the author of my next book, Whoopi Goldberg recommended this book as, like, one of her books. And I heard her talk about then, and then at some other point I'd probably seen it on, like, one of the list of, like, best memoirs of 2024 or, like, something like that. And I said, okay, let me pick it up. And honestly, when Whoopi recommended it, I didn't know anything about this Dunn family. I only learned about Griffin, the author, his sister's death, when Whoopi mentioned it on the show, and also his father being Dominique Dunn. I was like, okay, so, like, that was, like, something interesting. I hadn't known these people at all. But it honestly is an excellent memoir. It was really worth the hype. Probably some people who maybe lived during this time probably would pick it up because the Dunn family, again, they were new to me, were, you know, the connection with his sister was murdered in, I believe, 1982. His sister, Dominique, and his father became this great journalist, Dominic Dunn, and Griffin himself is an actor. And I also, after I finished reading the book, I looked up a picture of him, and I was like, oh, he was Nicky in This Is Us. So I've seen him. I just didn't know who he was or his backstory or anything like that. So he's detailing his life growing up in Hollywood in, like, I believe he was born in, like, the mid-50s, so kind of like the 50s, 60s, 70s, that kind of time. Also, Joan Didion was his aunt through his uncle married Joan Didion. And I was like, Joan Didion, that's the Dunn she was married to? And that great book, Year of Magical Thinking. So that was great because I'm a Joan Didion fan. So he's detailing his life growing up in Hollywood. But so some people probably pick it up because of that, because it's like there's a lot of very, like, name dropping moments in this book. Not even necessarily to, like, be flaunty, but just, like, this was his life. He grew up in Hollywood, and his family would have people over there in the industry to some kind of level, and he would just make friends. He was great friends with Carrie Fisher of Star Wars fame. So there was all those kind of things going on, but also just in general, like, this is a family memoir. So he's detailing kind of what's going on with his family. His father was a closeted gay man. Obviously, his sister was murdered. His mother had, was it MS? I might be messing up, but she had a condition where she was in a wheelchair at some point, and all these things, and the trial they went through after his sister was murdered, that was, like, a miscarriage of justice, and all these, like, things that had happened to Griffin throughout this time, kind of just, like, just all this. Another quote here I saw from a Goodreads review that I'm going to just quote directly. It says, this is from Emily, "The Friday Afternoon Club succeeds far beyond entertaining name dropping. This is a memoir of a complicated and loving family dealing with all manner of significant traumas, mental illness, addiction, and a closeted father, family rivalries, and most significantly, a senseless murder and the subsequent trial. And I just said here, whatever your motivations for picking up this book, it's well worth reading. As I said, a Hollywood element of it, people who are like big Hollywood fans, especially of that period, might be like, ooh, let me hear like what Harrison Ford was doing before he got really famous, or Carrie Fisher is a good friend of yours, let me hear, and all these things. That to me was like, I guess a bonus, or just like, okay, they'd be not dropping, he'd be saying names, and I'd think, okay, whatever, like, cool. But it really was like the way he told the story, going through these steps, all these things happening with this family. I think it was just a really riveting memoir. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I didn't say this, but I probably put it up already. I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads here. Yeah, I think it was a really great memoir. I'd recommend picking it up. So book 4 for February 2025, the final book of the month, is Bits and Pieces, My Mother, Brother, and Me by Whoopi Goldberg. This was a book, this just came out, it might have come out late last year. It's a memoir, another memoir. Whoopi Goldberg is somebody, obviously she's the EGOT winner, which is an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. She's this great performer, all these things. But I didn't really know tons about her. I read a book of hers last year called, what was it called? I'm forgetting what it was called. Let me look it up quickly. We're looking it up on the fly. But it was like one of these, cause I know there's, if someone says you complete me run, but I don't know if I read that. I know that's just a quote of hers. Oh, that is the book I read. Okay, so it is, if someone says you complete me run, Whoopi's Big Book of Relationships. Anyway, so I read that book, and just in general, like, I've been watching The View for several years. So she's a co-host on The View that I mentioned before. She was the one who first brought the attention to me, The Friday Afternoon Club, which is the book I read just before this one. And I've seen her movies, and I've seen these things, and I've learned little bits and pieces about her. But on The View, they promoted this book, and she was talking about a little bit of this book. They kind of did like a little interview for her. I wasn't sure if I was going to read it. I was like, I don't really know how much I want to read it, but I figured, like, it wasn't that long of a book. I said, let me just pick it up and give it a read. And she's someone who, at the time, she's mentioned her mother and her brother, obviously very connected to them. Those were like her people. It's a memoir, but it really is a love letter to them. She starts the book by explaining, like, my mother died at this time. My brother died like 8-9 years later. And at some point, I'm starting to, over the years since my mother has died, I started to forget little pieces of her. The memory started to fade a little bit. And my brothers are starting to just do that a little bit. And I want to get these things down before they completely fade. So I want to, like, write about my family, write about my mother and my brother. And it's like this very kind of beautiful little open of the book. And I think in general, a lot of people would relate to that, people who have lost somebody. When obviously when it's fresh, you remember things very clearly. And as weeks, months, years go by, things start to fade, it starts to be harder to remember the voices, or remember, like, where was I when we had this, like, what year was that, or what day? So I think it was nice to be able to kind of, like, get those things down for her. And she says, like, I might get things a little bit off, that's okay, but I'm just basically trying to, like, tell you, like, my upbringing about the family. This was the book as well. I read the book, but I also was listening to the audiobook as I did it, which I really recommend, because this was run on Goodreads, and also in general, I've seen people talk about the audiobook. And I think in general, when it's a memoir, I like to have the audiobook. If it's the memoir, if the person's reading their memoir, it's nice to have the audiobook. And I still am a proponent of, like, reading with it, because that way it's like, you can still, like, highlight things, you can still, like, kind of be up to date on it. But especially for something like that, where it was very like a performance. I think about some of, like, the best memoirs I've read with an audiobook companion has been, like, Will Smith's memoir, Will, or Viola Davis's memoir, Finding Me. Like, I think it's good to have that, especially you're hearing it right from them. But with Whoopi in particular, it was like, there's obviously humor in the book. She's a very funny person, and she was a comedian. But she'd be, like, giggling at stories and kind of, like, getting you through it. And it was a very, like, nice, like, listening experience. And I would definitely recommend, if you read this book, to, like, have the audiobook as well, because I think it just enriches the text when you're hearing it straight from them. So it was, like, a really great performance from her. And as the book is filled with humor, there's also grief. She's discussing, obviously, the loss of her her mother and her brother. And so in this, we have grief, we have creativity, pursuing a dream. Obviously, she became this EGOT winner, and just many life lessons. Many of them are provided by Whoopi's mother, who sounds like she was quite the woman. Whoopi says, none of this other stuff would have happened to me without her. So she's very much her mother and brother throughout the whole book, and we're seeing her start to rise to like become the person she is, and seeing how she is able to like, you know, take care of her mother first, and then take care of her brother. Her brother becomes her driver. Her mother moves out and helps her raise her daughter Alex. Moves out to California. They were living in New York originally. That's where they're from. It's just this great memoir where she's telling us about her life and her story, and it's only like the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, there's a lot more she could have delved into, but I think again, it really was it felt like more of like just a love letter to her family, which obviously is what the subtitle says: my mother, my brother, and me. Yeah, and I think another piece, I mentioned how this touches on grief, obviously being without them. Towards the end of the book, she says like, you know, I love my family. I have my daughter. I have my grandkids. I have my grandkids. All these things, but I miss my people. Like, those are my people. Those are the two who've been with me since the beginning, who knew with me when I was just Karen Johnson. Her real name is Karen Johnson. She tells a story about how Whoopi Goldberg even came about. Yeah, I think it was just a really great memoir. Again, I keep forgetting to say my numerical ratings. I'm looking at them right now, but I probably put them already. I give this a 4 out of 5. Very solid memoir. All right, that is quick and fast, kind of quick and fast. The 4 books I read in February 2025. As I said, we are up to 11 books now for the year, which is great. I had another book I thought I was going to finish tonight, but it's not very good. I'm not liking it very much. Probably will be one of my first books I talk about next month. But yeah, I won't keep jabbering on here. Let's wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you're reading. Let me know what you think I should be reading. Send me those recommendations. Put them in the comments. Get in contact with me in different ways if that is what you need. But yeah, send me some stuff. I'm looking forward to continue to knock down books this year. So yeah, thanks so much for watching again. See ya. Quick little insert, just a reminder. I will link my Goodreads below. Follow me there if you'd like to read my full reviews. Also, I like Goodreads because you could see my highlights for the books, any notes I made. That's all up on the Goodreads. So go ahead and click that link down below and keep reading.